The bustling spaceport was alive with noise, color, and motion. Ships of every shape and size clanged and roared as they docked or took off. Merchants shouted their wares, traders bargained aggressively, and travelers moved hurriedly along the crowded corridors. Among them, a lone human named Caleb wandered through the crowd. He had seen many strange creatures in his time traveling across the galaxy, but nothing had prepared him for what was about to happen. Caleb was tall and lean, with the kind of calm confidence that came from surviving situations most people would consider impossible. He worked as a salvage and transport specialist, moving valuable cargo between settlements and rarely attracting attention. Today, however, he was in the market district of Viridian Prime, a hub for interstellar commerce, negotiating for a rare energy crystal with a trader who had a reputation for being sharp and untrustworthy. The trader's booth was cluttered with glittering items, alien artifacts, and devices Caleb couldn't even identify. As Caleb leaned over to examine a particularly intricate energy matrix, he didn't notice the glowing eyes watching him from across the square. The creature was part human, part predator, a Beastwoman named Lyra. Her family had long been feared and admired on several frontier worlds for their strength, agility, and cunning. Lyra herself was a mix of wolf-like features and humanoid build, with fur covering her arms and a sweeping tail that flicked with curiosity and annoyance. Unlike most of her kind, she didn't hunt in packs. She preferred independence, which often put her at odds with her more tribal kin. Lyra had been wandering through the market, observing humans for weeks. She was fascinated by their unpredictability, their ability to negotiate, cheat, and adapt in ways her instincts alone could never explain. But her fascination had limits. When she saw Caleb speaking with the trader, a known smuggler, in her eyes, her instincts fled. Traders were cunning, but humans, they had a way of slipping by rules, bending situations to their favor. Lyra felt the stirrings of possessiveness and territoriality, something she didn't understand fully yet. From where she stood, she could see Caleb's hand brush against the energy matrix, testing its stability. The trader's eyes glimmered, suspicious but calculative, as he leaned closer to Caleb and whispered something. Lyra's ears twitched at the sound of words she barely understood, but the tone was clear flattery, lies, manipulation. Without thinking, without reasoning, she reacted in one fluid motion. Lyra leapt from a hiding spot, landing squarely between Caleb and the trader. The crowd froze, some stepping back in fear while others pulled out their recording devices, eager to capture the moment. Lyra bared her teeth and growled softly, a warning and a threat combined. Then, without a second thought, she lunged at Caleb, clamping her jaw onto his shoulder. Pain shot through him, sharp but not deep. Her bite was a warning, not an intent to kill. The crowd gasped. Caleb stumbled but remained standing, holding his hands up in confusion. "Wait, what are you doing?" Caleb exclaimed, his voice a mixture of surprise and pain. Lyra's glowing eyes locked onto his, fierce and unyielding. She snarled, then released him, stepping back with her tail bristling. Caleb rubbed his shoulder, noticing the shallow puncture marks. They burned, but they weren't life-threatening. He looked around at the crowd, which was now buzzing with excitement and fear. What was that for?" Caleb asked, keeping his voice calm, though internally his mind raced. Humans didn't normally get attacked by wild creatures in public unless they were criminals or extremely unlucky. Lyra didn't answer. She tilted her head, studying him. Her instincts were still on high alert, her muscles tense. The trader, meanwhile, scuttled back behind his booth, muttering curses in his own language. Caleb realized quickly that Lyra's attack was not random. It was deliberate. "You're defending me?" Caleb asked cautiously, his hand brushing against the marks on his shoulder. From him, Lyra's eyes narrowed. She growled again, low and guttural, but this time it was closer to a warning than aggression. She circled him, sniffing the air around him, as though trying to understand what kind of being he was. Caleb stayed still, slowly realizing that Lyra wasn't a mindless predator. She was testing him, evaluating his reaction. Finally, she spoke, her voice a strange mix of growls and careful articulation. "You trust him?" Caleb blinked. The question startled him. Most creatures didn't speak, or at least, not in a language he could understand. "No, I was negotiating," he replied carefully. "I'm not sure if I can trust him." Lyra tilted her head again, her tail flicked with impatience. "Humans, strange, always words, always testing." Caleb chuckled nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, I guess you could say that." He realized the crowd was watching every interaction, recording, whispering, and speculating. For a moment, he considered running, leaving the market, and avoiding whatever trouble had just bit him. But something about Lyra's presence held him in place. There was intelligence in her gaze, curiosity, and something else, something raw, almost primal. Lyra stepped closer, and the crowd instinctively moved back. She sniffed Caleb again, this time more thoroughly, her eyes narrowing. Caleb felt a strange connection forming instinctively. He understood that this creature wasn't just reacting to him physically but also sensing something deeper. Perhaps it was his courage, or maybe it was his calm in the face of danger. Whatever it was, it drew Lyra's attention. "You human fight?" she asked finally. Caleb hesitated. He had fought in small skirmishes, protected cargo, and occasionally, he defended himself against pirates, but he wasn't a soldier. "I can," he admitted. "I don't want trouble though." Lyra growled softly, and Caleb realized that her aggression wasn't purely about dominance, it was a test of trust, strength, and perhaps something more instinctive that humans didn't typically understand. "Then you safe," she said after a long pause. "For now," Caleb nodded, still confused but cautiously relieved. "For now," he repeated. The crowd began to murmur again, some laughing nervously, others still shocked by the sudden attack. The trader, meanwhile, had slunk out from behind his booth, looking both frightened and furious. Caleb realized that Lyra's intervention had likely saved him from being swindled or worse. Lyra didn't linger. She backed away, her posture still tense but slightly relaxed. Her tail flicked once before she turned and vanished into the crowd, leaving Caleb staring after her in disbelief. He rubbed his shoulder again, feeling the sting of the bite and the odd warmth of something he couldn't name, a mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and a strange sense of connection to the Beastwoman. Over the next few days, Caleb couldn't stop thinking about her. He returned to Viridian Prime, retracing his steps, hoping to find her again. He asked around, but few had actually seen her. Most had only heard rumors of a wolf-like creature roaming the market, fearless, fierce, and unpredictable. He learned quickly that Lyra was not just strong, she had a reputation as a protector of her territory, someone who would challenge anyone who threatened the balance of her world. One evening, while Caleb was examining a shipment in a quieter part of the market, he heard the unmistakable flick of claws against metal. Lyra appeared, silent and swift, her glowing eyes fixed on him. Caleb held his hands up, showing he meant no harm. "You return," she said simply. Caleb nodded. "I wanted to see you too, understand you." Lyra's tail flicked with interest. She circled him again, sniffing, evaluating why. Because Caleb paused, searching for words. "You saved me, and I don't know why, but I feel connected. You're not just a creature out of instinct. There's more to you." Lyra blinked, clearly considering his words. She growled softly, then made a motion that Caleb understood as an invitation. "Come closer." He stepped forward cautiously. Her presence was overwhelming, a mix of power, grace, and raw energy. "You human, strange," she said finally. "Not afraid, not running. Most flee, most scream." Caleb smiled faintly. "Most don't get bitten in public by a Beastwoman either." Lyra's ears twitched. For the first time, she allowed herself a small gesture of amusement, a subtle twitch of her lips. It wasn't a full smile, but it was close. Caleb felt his heart skip a beat. He realized then that Lyra wasn't just a wild creature. She was capable of emotion, understanding, and maybe even loyalty if one could earn it. Over the following weeks, their interactions grew. Caleb learned to navigate her instincts, understanding when to speak, when to remain silent, when to act. Lyra, in turn, began to trust him more, allowing him to enter parts of her world few humans had ever seen. They trained together, hunted small game, and explored the edges of the city that humans had long ignored. One day, after a particularly long hunt, Lyra allowed Caleb to rest beside her. She leaned slightly against him, a gesture of trust and connection that felt alien and yet comforting. Caleb realized then that the bite in public had not been aggression alone, it had been the beginning of a bond, a test, a challenge, and ultimately an acknowledgement that two very different species could understand and rely on each other.